while, he's lived in Singapore for quite a while, and more importantly, he works with Indians all the time. So, Andrew, what are your experiences about India?
I feel I may be walking into a trap here. I'm looking around the room and I think I'm in a minority of one. So I think I've got to be very careful what I say, or I could go into.
They're all friends, they are okay.
So I'm being very, very careful. I mean, my experience is quite interesting. I think a lot of the points have been touched upon because, I'm British originally. And as I was growing up, a lot of you in this room are probably aware that there was a huge amount of immigration from the Indian subcontinent into the UK in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Britain's always had some Indian immigration for a long, long time, I guess, since the early relationship between the two countries started. But what I used to observe at school was a lot of the people I went to school with in an industrial town called Sheffield in the north of England were the kids of people from the Indian subcontinent, and the pressure on them to conform to Yorkshire norms, Sheffield norms, was intense. The pressure on them to, follow the local football team, adopt the local accent, adopt the local ways of behaving was very, very strong. And what was noticeable is most of them did. So when I am in touch with those people now, they identify themselves as being very much from that region. They don't really consider themselves to be Indian. And I think I've talked to some of my Indian colleagues who have met British Indians themselves, and they've seen this. It's similar in the United States. I think a lot of second-generation Indians identify and integrate very strongly with the local country that they move into. So I had that experience of these people that I knew being, let's say, an ethnic minority. It's hard to call them a cultural minority, but they were an ethnic minority in Sheffield. As I grew older, I then started work in London. And of course, there are a lot of British Indians or British Pakistanis living and working in London. But I first started meeting Indian Indians there, and they were under similar pressure, I guess, to conform to the norms of the way things operated in London. Most of them, I guess, happily did. A lot of them happily embraced the local culture, and you see that in the US and other places as well. Now, what's interesting for me, coming to Singapore and working at Frost & Sullivan, is the boot is on the other foot, so to speak. Perhaps that's a negative word. It's very interesting for me, but I am the ethnic minority, very much so. So, I observe things that I didn't observe before about Indians and Indian culture, and even people of Indian ethnicity, British Indians as well. They face challenges themselves in that nobody assumes that they're British, and nobody believes that they're British when they travel around the world, even though that's how they identify themselves. But I started picking up on things, like I would notice when I read the English that was written by some of my colleagues, the way of writing English was different. And at first I would think, this is just wrong to use words like prepone, or the same instead of it, or revert back. There's a whole bunch of terms that aren't what I would call standard English.
Invented by Indians.
Yeah, they're invented by Indians, but then I noticed there was a pattern. It wasn't just one or two people that were doing it, it was most of my Indian colleagues. Using would instead of will is another example. So I started realizing that this is, a form of English, but it's distinctly Indian English. And what I've found is that I myself am starting to pick up some of those habits. I'm even starting to move my head around a bit when I talk to people. That was a question I'd like to ask you. Why do Indians shake their heads when they mean yes? It would be a good one to answer. But I'm starting to find myself adopting some of these habits. Right. And it's a very interesting experience for me.
When we were discussing, you also mentioned that you experienced a distinct Jugaad ability.
That's a very good point. Just before saying that, one of the things I'd like to say generally about Indians from my experience is it's impossible to generalize. Again, I think that's come up. In India itself, you get different religions, different cultures, different languages. Many Indians do eat beef, some don't. Some have arranged marriages, some don't. It's very, very difficult to generalize. Is the first thing that I've noticed about Indians. So even talking about Jugaad, so I have noticed there's a tendency for Indians to solve problems or issues at the very last minute, and to multitask, and to only really worry about things at the last minute and not plan things in advance and so on. But I have met a few Indians who aren't like that at all. So I have met some Indians who struggle multitasking. But it is true that this Jugaad you're describing, there is a tendency, and I think that perhaps reflects the nature of Indian society itself.
Right. So when, let's say, any of your colleagues comes up with a Jugaad solution, or something that's typically considered as suboptimal, how do you respond to it? What do you feel? Do you feel he's, oh wow, he's brilliant, or you say, oh, he's trying to bend rules? What's the...
Good question. It's both, right? It's both. I mean, I myself as an individual have a tendency to be a bit jugaad. Maybe that's why I'm relatively comfortable in Indian environments. But it depends on the situation. You know, I think a lot of situations in business, in reality, you do have to think on your feet, and that's why I think in some of the industries that you get a lot of there are certain industries a lot of Indians excel in, like IT, like management consulting, like law. You notice or I've observed, and I think those are the businesses where you do really need to be able to think on your feet, multitask, come up with a quick solution. You can't rely on others and the infrastructure around you necessarily to deal with the issues that you're addressing.
Yeah.
So it depends. Occasionally I will, beat someone up because it's a situation where I think they really did need to follow a strict process. But so it's both.
Right. So, as you rightly pointed out, living in India, we don't really trust the system. So even when I walked into this room, I exactly know if the light goes off, how to escape. Because that is inbuilt, that is part of the brain which keeps processing, mapping, and if systems fail, then we know what to do. So yeah, but yes, even in my book I mentioned that yes, we are good at jugaad, but that's not something that's way to the future. What got us here may not take us further, and there is a big deviation required to go and follow the rules and plan ahead and give a plus.
I mean, I read that. I think that's a good point. But I think the Indian diaspora figured that out, because I think in India itself, maybe it's hard to depend on infrastructure and others and everything working properly. So you have to come up with these kind of solutions yourself. But I think Indians who leave India and they go to somewhere like Singapore, where everything seems to function smoothly and everything is very carefully planned, I think sometimes have to think twice about jugaad.
Right, sure.
Which is the point you made.
Yeah. So thanks, Andrew. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions I had was just, who's your target audience for this book? Because I noticed it's predominantly Indians in this room, but I would think this would be of interest to non-Indians.
Yeah, that's right. So I called all of these because they are my friends and they will come and I call them. So but I think the real target segment for this book is people who are at cutting edge of the culture. So if I go and take this book, deep inside India and try to sell it, it'll not make any sense for them, because for them such a question has never occurred. Why do Indians don't eat beef? Because my father said so, and that's a good enough answer. But when those Indians and most of these Indians are now living abroad, so I do believe that one of the major segments or one of the major readers for this would be Indians who want to, connect to other people who have also gone through similar experiences. Number two, we do like to read about ourselves, although it is suffering, misery, but there is a connect somewhere. And I have also tried to give some rational sounding answers. So Indians are definitely one of the, and on the other hand, I also think that those who are getting in touch with Indians more often, they don't understand the inscrutable ways. Of course, they would be foreigners, but they would be better off reading this book.
I think the timing is good because there's a lot of India as a country is becoming more prominent, becoming more noticed. I think I've talked with colleagues of Indian history and so on. It's only really since the early 90s that India's kind of opened up big time, and there's a lot more interest in Indian culture at the moment and issues like this, why Indians have certain characteristics. I think the timing is very pertinent.
True.
And you've got scope to write a lot more.
Right. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.